Hello and welcome to Saturday Conversation here at the Inner Space Cebu, Philippines. Our special guest speaker joining us from the south of France is Rita Denise Lawrence. I'm sure you will find her talk today very engaging.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And I'm very honored that you have invited me to take up this subject. I'm very especially interested in the Bhagavad Gita, and I have come to know it deeply because the study and practice that we do at the Brahma Kumaris is said to be the original knowledge of the Gita. And in fact, it is the most ancient scripture of 5,000 years age. But over time, it was altered a great deal, especially around about 1,000 years ago from now. And so to have the access to the original knowledge is really very special because it makes everything fall into place beautifully. So today we're going to take up this phrase that you are your own best friend and your own worst enemy. Now, many people know this phrase because it's very famous, but very few people know that it comes from the Gita. But I'd also like to take it up in the context of the knowledge of the Gita, because when you look at it in context, it's quite different than when you look at it just by itself. Because the Gita is all about the eternal relationship between the soul and God, the Supreme Soul. And there are many things that happen in eternity. And so here we are in the context of time and space, even though as a soul we are eternal beings. And so we come into time and space. That means we come into action. And the Gita is also about the philosophy of karma. So if you know the philosophy of karma well, then you can be your own best friend. And if you don't, it's fairly easy to become your own worst enemy. And a lot of this is because people trust their feelings sometimes more than what they know. And there is a difference between what you know and what you feel. So one of the things the Gita tells us is that feelings arise from sense perception. And sense perception is, by definition, deceptive. So if you trust feelings that are on the basis of sense perception, there's a good chance that you will be deceived and regret having trusted your feelings. And in such a situation, you may do an action which is detrimental to yourself and causes you damage in some way. And in that case, you would be your worst enemy. And the Gita and the spiritual knowledge that we study in Brahma Kumaris also talks to us about spiritual powers. And spiritual powers are very important for us to be able to manage our feelings. Because the word feelings covers a huge spectrum. And sometimes we dart around the spectrum just using the word feelings, and there are some things which we can feel that are not feelings, but they're kind of quite deep inner perceptions, and we may call it feelings. And then there are other things which are emotional knee-jerk reactions to circumstances. We call that feelings as well. So it's a very big spectrum, and people just use the word feelings to cover the whole thing. And in this case, it's not very easy to tell what you're dealing with. So I want to separate out some of the different parts of this spectrum, and maybe we might try to use different words for different parts of the spectrum, because I think the word feelings is so vague and so general that just like that, it deceives us. So to be one's own best friend means that you're very, very aware about what you're doing. And karma can be a thought or a word or an act. It's also a response to what is going on, whether it's a reaction or a considered response. All of it is karma. Even breathing is karma. So all the time, a person is engaged in action. And action originates in the soul, and these originating impulses are expressed through the body. And even if it is a thought, what you're thinking will very often show on your face, especially if what you're thinking is connected with an emotion. Something may have disturbed you or distressed you, and you may not express it verbally or practically, but you're feeling it inside and you're disturbed inside. So this changes the vibrations and the atmosphere. And it also influences what you do next. So feelings are really very important for us to take into consideration, even though they are most often deceptive. When you are in any situation, in any day, everyone starts their day, usually start their day with the day before, bleeding into it. But when you do a spiritual practice, you start your day with meditation. And part of meditation involves making sure that you've really cleared out whatever has happened earlier. So things may happen which affect you quite a lot. But if you don't let go, then your subsequent actions are influenced by what affected you, and you're not dispassionately looking at what you have to do given the actual situation. So letting go is very, very important. And one of the very good slogans or aphorisms that applies here is second by second, let go of the past and be in the present. Because as long as the past is affecting you, you're not really there for the present. And the only time that you have any actual free choice to act as you would like to act, as you wish to act, is the present moment. And so if you look at time in terms of lots of seconds, then second by second, you have to be there for the moment and let go of the past. And this is a practice, because normally people mix everything in and don't really know whether they're still in the past or worried about the future. And in that way, the present moment is lost to you. And then your karma is not really according to you, but your karma is according to circumstances. And when this happens, that you respond to circumstances or react to circumstances, there is where you start to become your own worst enemy. So being your own best friend has to do with being there for yourself. Sometimes people would think, well, this may be selfish. We have to be concerned about others. We have to be concerned about what's happening all around us. And of course, that's true, but everything must be in balance. Now, the soul itself is essentially, originally pure and peaceful, and quiet and still. And then from that quiet place, you come into action. So we have a word that you hear very often among the Brahma Kumaris and among many others who are aware about it, and that is the word Om Shanti. So Om Shanti means I am a soul at peace. So this is your starting point. I start from a place of peace, and from there I proceed into action. But if instead of that, you start from a place of reacting to what just happened, which is nothing to do with what next is happening, then what you do is not the right thing or not the best thing. And there you become your worst enemy. Because as soon as you do something, as soon as you say something, as soon as you think something, it goes on a stream, on a roll, and if it gets too strong for you, you can't stop it, you can't control it, and that it takes you into things that are very regrettable, but which you definitely will have to pay for. And then you have been your worst enemy. So being your own best friend has a lot to do with giving great importance to yourself, great importance to how you conduct yourself, how you operate in the world, and using the powers of spirituality, the knowledge of the laws of karma, you would start to create what we call fortune. So some people talk about luck, or good luck or bad luck. And in spiritual study and practice, we would say that there isn't anything like luck, but it's all to do with your karma. And everyone has good days and bad days, but you never necessarily wonder why one day is good, another day is bad, what's going on here. Some of it has to do with old karma that you did long, long ago and you forgot about, and then the consequences of it come up and you react to it if it's a strong negative circumstance. And it would again put you into doing something which would be bad for you, in which case you're your worst enemy. So when you say, okay, it's a bad day, so what does that mean? It means there's some sort of karmic consequence coming along. And sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just a test. And then you have to recognize it. So all the different parts of the study and practice of Raj Yoga are always work together. So something that has the potential to put you off track, to disturb you, to make everything start going wrong. If you're practiced in this, you would immediately pick up the signal and interpret this as this is a signal to say that, okay, I need to be specially attentive on focusing on myself, going into my peace, because the atmosphere is getting away from me and I have to re-establish it, reset it, so that I create the atmosphere and circumstances that are favorable for me to do my next karma. And you can do it in a matter of seconds, but it's just important to catch the signal and do it. And then you really are your own best friend. Being internalized is helpful for this. Of course, there is the inner world and there is the outer world. And most people, most of the time, live on the surface of their bodies, completely under the influence of what you see and hear, and feel and touch and whatever's going on around. And because you are on the surface of your body, caught in sense perception, then you are ruled by the external reality, which is very capable of deceiving you. And so it is considered really very essential to not be too far on the outside and to keep a balance so that you're never very far away from the inside, which enables you to notice if you're being pulled away from where you need to go, how you need to be, and always remain in your own power, in your own mastery, being the person who is running the show. Of course, there are many things that you can't do anything about. And in that case, you switch to the mode of a detached observer. And you say to yourself, well, it is what it is, but it doesn't have to rule you, you see. And you just stay in your inner position while that particular moment, that atmosphere and vibration passes, and you keep yourself in your own consciousness of your own reality, of your own identity. And these circumstances shift continuously, and you learn to shift with them so that when you can be free to come into action and do something that is beneficial for you, beneficial for everybody else, do it. Seize the time. There's also a very famous expression, carpe diem, seize the day, and do it when you can, and don't do when it's not the right moment. This is wisdom. So being your own best friend means that you're operating from this acquired wisdom, which is a lifelong acquisition of understanding, which is also something that must be matched by the accumulation of your inner personal power. I think one of the things that makes a person into their own worst enemy is lack of understanding that they don't have enough inner power. There's a difference between inner power and force or aggression. And there are many people who get what they want by using force, anger, aggression, different kinds of manipulations. But eventually that is not really very wise, because it becomes a negative karma, and then it comes back in your face and hits you and embarrasses you. So then again, one has become one's own worst enemy because of not understanding that what I need is not that kind of force, but inner power. And this is where the meditation is very important. There are many different aspects of meditation. And the main thing is to absorb spiritual energy from the Supreme Being, and really understand that the soul gets depleted easily. When you think of yourself as an eternal soul, how long is eternity? Well, it's very long. And just about where are you in eternity? Well, there are times when you're in a very strong state, a very empowered state. And then there are other times when the soul gets really depleted. And I think at the moment, the whole world is in a very depleted state, and individually and collectively, which means the likelihood of doing something which is very counterproductive, very damaging to the self and others, it's very easy to do that. It's very easy to have a reaction. And then you set off a chain reaction of escalated, unwise actions. And it becomes very difficult to do anything about it because it takes over. So this is why picking up these early warning signals is very helpful. And you can do that best when you keep a balance of being internalized and externalized. So moment by moment, you're going in, you're coming out. When you find yourself doing things too quickly, usually they don't work so well. And you have this expression, more haste, less speed. And so people know these things, and that's why there are expressions that demonstrate that awareness. But yet, when you can't do what you know, that means you don't have enough power. And so the most important thing, which is really to be your own best friend, is to give attention to maintaining the balance of power. The balance of power is usually an expression for the political arena, but inside, with you and your own self, there's also a balance of power. Because there are moments when you are internalized, and these are the moments where you can take power. And moments when you are externalized, you're using your power. And the idea of spiritual practice is to acquire more than you use, which means there is a conservation and accumulation of internal energy or spiritual energy. Now, spiritual energy gets used up very quickly when you do an action which is bad for you. And when you do an action which is good for you, then you accumulate, but not enough. There has to be action that's good for you, and there also has to be quiet communion and communication with the source. Set your day and have an awareness about what has to be done when. When you live in the country, which I do, you're very aware of sunrise, sunset, stars in the sky, the clouds, the wind, the rain, the sun, and all around there is nature, which is very much responding to the weather. And there is a rhythm in nature which corresponds well to human inner clock, you can say. But most people, they live in the city where you don't know whether it's day or night. Very few people get to see the stars in the sky. If you want to know what's going on, you consult with your mobile phone and see the weather forecast. But you're out of touch with these natural rhythms. And so it gives even more importance to setting your own rhythm. And when you wake up early in the morning and you give time to sit quiet and draw strength from the source, then you're ready for the day. But if you don't do that, you start off depleted and you get very depleted. So a very good aspect of being one's own best friend is to create these rhythms for yourself. Even if your professional life or your family life may mitigate against it, but if you want to, you can. And this willpower is also a byproduct of meditation. Because when you meditate, you get power. And one aspect of power is willpower. Another aspect of power is that you can manage your feelings. Another aspect of power is that you can understand what is not really visible. You can pick up. You have an enhanced intuition. You understand what you need. You understand what's going on that is hidden. And this is also part of personal power. And all of these attributes of personal power make it very natural for you to do the right thing at the right time for the right amount of time, and not when it's not the right thing. All of these are signs of being your own best friend. So in many ways, the saying from the Gita, you are your own best friend and you are your own worst enemy, it's a kind of a warning, an alert, which says that you can't really blame anyone or anything for what's happening to you, because it's all up to you. In fact, it's even quite useful to give yourself this perspective, this policy of telling yourself, no one is to blame for your circumstances, only your own self. Because knowing the laws of karma also means that whatever circumstance you are in is on one hand a byproduct of your own karma, good or bad, but also it is like a teaching. And you have to interpret what are the contents, visible and invisible, of the circumstances you are in moment by moment, so that you understand what it's asking you to do. And in many of these, there are lessons. Lesson means that there are some areas in life in which you are weak. Because another very important statement from the Gita is a definition of yoga. Very, very wonderful definition of yoga. And yoga is skill in action. So when you are your own best friend, you're attentive not to be your own worst enemy. You're attentive on taking spiritual power regularly and making sure that what you're doing is beneficial for you and for everyone else. You become very skilled in action. Action means your interaction with circumstances, with people, with yourself, with your inner life, and dealing with all sorts of obstacles that definitely come. And these obstacles are there to make you strong and to make you experienced, by which you become more and more skilled. So everything, whether it seems good or bad, is useful. And that depends on if you understand how to make it useful. And for that, there is another wonderful power that we learn about, which is called the power of transformation. So no matter what's going on, you can use it to your advantage. It's a kind of recycling. If some circumstance comes at you as quite a bad thing, and you look at it with the angle of perception that there is something good in here, and I just have to discern it and find it, recognize it, and switch my response to it, which may be initially annoyance or disappointment or something like that. But very quickly, you understand the hidden meaning behind it, and you switch your response, your feelings. So your feelings are very much secondary to your understanding. And I think this is also a sign of someone who is their own best friend, if they give greater importance to understanding, to looking at the whole, to interpreting what's going on. Something may feel really good, but it may not be very good. Something may feel really awful, but it may actually be really good. And so one has to be careful not to be deceived by feelings. I was talking earlier about the spectrum of feelings. So there are some feelings that are not really feelings like sense perceptions, but something more like a refined intuition where the mind and the understanding and perception are very refined, and you get an ability to perceive, which takes the form of a feeling, but it's not like an emotional reaction, more like a refined perception where you understand something quite subtle, quite hidden, and you will say, yeah, this is my feeling. It's like an insight. And it's very, very different from a feeling which you later regret, you see. And this is why I think when we're, looking at what's going on with ourselves, to really understand the breadth of that spectrum covered by the words feeling. And perhaps you must give some other words, and you can say something is a negative emotion, something is a refined perception, something is a sense. There are many words that we actually have, but because people are, I think, a bit loose with language, the possibility of getting a word absolutely right for what is going on with you, I think is very helpful. You're talking to yourself, you're talking to other people, and if we use words very accurately, then we can communicate better, whether it's to ourselves or to others. Because when you're communicating to yourself accurately, then it's likely that you will make a decision to do something which is very beneficial for yourself and for other people. So look at your day, but also look at the course of your life. And you will see that there are certain aspects of you that do things very positively, and other aspects of you that take you off into negativity. And this we call sanskaras. That's an interesting word, sanskaras. I use the word from India, the Hindi word sanskaras, because it doesn't translate into English so easily. Sanskaras is connected with your culture, your upbringing, your personality, your whether you're artistic, whether you're scientific, whether you're practical, whether you're what kind of person you are. All of this comes under sanskaras. And so generally speaking, in the practice of meditation and spiritual study, you look at yourself and you look at yourself as a collection, a constellation of different sanskaras. And these are also kind of urges to act in a certain way. And there again, when you're looking at your sanskaras, which reveal themselves to you as even personality traits through your whole life, you can tell what attributes of yourself tend to take you to circumstances which are very detrimental. And so then you have to use your spiritual power to modify those sanskaras. And there are other sanskaras which prompt you very naturally, very intuitively to do the right thing at the right time. These are good ones. These are the ones that you want to conserve and cultivate and develop. But the inner characteristics that take you to regrettable conclusions really need to be attended to. And you will find, if you look at it closely, that they tend to go against the voice of conscience. If you go against the voice of conscience too much, which is not very much, but it will stop talking to you. So I think to create a natural, intuitive way of doing the right thing, no matter what the circumstances are, there you need to be just in your power. The more you give yourself attention, or the more you give attention to your meditation, the more you increase this power, you listen to the voice of conscience. And you find very often that there is a clash between the voice of conscience and the urge to act against it. And when you're not in your power, the urge to act against it is strong. When you're in your power, the urge to act against your conscience is weaker than the voice of conscience. And so this is the shifting that we're doing in the spiritual practice, is to increase and intensify your inner power. So the voice of conscience is really your guide. You're not really guided by external things. Your inner voice of conscience is very adequate, moment by moment. And when you have a very good relationship with your conscience, then you are really your own best friend. Because your conscience is an internal part of your being. The mind, the conscience, the sanskaras, the sense of self, the feeling of your self-worth, your honor, your identity, all these, when they're aligned and they work together very well, they're really your best friend. When you're not in your power, not attentive on what's really good for you in the short term, mid-term, long term, then easily you become your own worst enemy. So I've given you quite a few pointers about this, and so I think I'll stop here. Maybe you have some questions. All of these things do require a lot of thought and introspection, inner discussion with yourself to get really clear, to really be your own best friend. So thank you very much.
There is no one more reliable than your own self when you're in your power. And the question is, please expand on this statement a bit more.
there are different signals, I think, that tell you when you're in your power, that you don't get drawn away from yourself. Being in your power, you have to really be with yourself. And you get into interactions with people where they spin you a line, or they take you for a ride, or they manipulate you in one way or the other. And if you have to be able to pick it up right away, and then you're the one who determines the course of what happens. But people do deceive each other intentionally. And so if you were a bit naive, then you're not going to be in your power. One of the things that a lot of people are working on at the moment, using different sorts of therapies and so on, is trauma. Because a person who has passed through trauma, especially childhood trauma, has wounds in terms of their being in their power. And so healing from that is a process of coming into your power. And it's pretty much, I haven't met anybody who hasn't got a number of wounds. And when you do a spiritual practice, you encounter these wounds as circumstances where you just are not able to perform optimally. And there is where you are, what do they say, frozen, or flight or fight, or any of these things that happen, where you come under the influence of any situation which corresponds to any number of your traumas. And then it prevents you from being yourself. It takes you away from yourself. And the world of psychology looks at this a great deal. And there is quite a lot of interface and closeness between what happens in psychological work and what happens in spiritual work. And I think also that if you're going to do a spiritual practice, you need to sort out your psychological issues, which will come up. And you have to also distinguish between what's a psychological issue and what's a spiritual practice, because they're not the same thing, but they do work together. So coming into your power means also you're sorting out your psychological issues, which also correspond in many ways to your karmic accounts. So there are different ways of looking at these circumstances, internal circumstances, vulnerabilities, wounds, inabilities in social interaction, and so on. And, the idea of all of this kind of work, whether it's spiritual work directly or psychological work or addiction recovery work, is to be yourself, balanced, fully operational, healed, and all of this. And this is a lifetime work. That's just the way it is.
Sometimes there is a strong negative feelings about a soul. How to protect myself from such vibrations at that moment and the future. How to resolve that karma with that soul. Okay, this is a relationship issue.
There are two things. One is that you might have a karmic account with another person from another lifetime, which is coming up in the form of you have a strong reaction, a negative reaction to that person, an overreaction to that person. And it requires you to control your tendency to think negatively about anyone. And here is an example. If you think negatively about someone, you will get into a strong karmic bondage with them. And so you have to be careful, because then you can be your own worst enemy if you carry on down that road. But you have to control yourself. And I think, you said gently control yourself. Sometimes you have to control yourself. Not quite gently may not be strongly enough, but you have to take yourself in hand and say, hey, self, don't do this. You're going to get yourself in trouble. Stop. And understand that every person is the way they are because they're destined to be that way, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to accommodate that being, because there are lots of different beings in this world and they're all different. And if you don't like someone, you have to deal with that. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong with them. In your opinion, there may be, but that's just your opinion. And the reality is that if you operate on the basis of an opinion like that, you're going to be your own worst enemy, because you got yourself into a very limited matter of preference. So you need to upgrade your spiritual practice and have more power to accommodate people who are very different, and people who rub you up the wrong way, people who you don't approve of, this or that. There are all sorts of feelings that you can have about different people, but your most important concern has to be, how am I conducting myself, and what are the consequences going to be for me? Because there's nothing you can do about how another person is. It's not your business in many ways, but you're confronted with another person, which opens up a personal weakness, and you need to notice that and see what your personal weakness is and deal with it. And that is a good way to approach it, I think.
How can we refine our awareness of our true conscience and an acquired conscience based on, let's say, what our religion or society, tradition, custom have conditioned us to believe as right or wrong? Right,
well, those two are nothing to do with conscience. Your conditioning from your religion or your society or whatever is external, and your conscience is internal. These are two completely different originating voices. Your conscience is your pure self. And when you go against your conscience a lot, which is what a lot of people do, to go against their conscience, they will follow external voices and go against their conscience, and then the conscience will shut down. And then you're at the mercy of external voices, which are very often telling you things that they say is good for you, but actually is good for them. Your conscience will always tell you what's good for you. So the way to awaken it is keep listening and act on it. It costs you a lot to do that, because when you do the right thing, it can irritate a lot of other people, because it makes them look bad. They don't like that.
Well, just on the subject of conscience, we have a pretty direct question here about what is the role of guilt, and is it reliable as a gauge on what is not right?
Well, guilt should not last more than a quarter of a second. It's just a signal that, hey, don't do that. But people who indulge in lots of guilt, that's because they're listening to external voices which tell them that they should feel guilty, or they're not feeling guilty enough, or they should be punished, and. So all of that is worldly. It's not really spiritual. So if you spend a lot of time feeling guilty, I would say don't stop that. That's not a good idea. But it's more, okay, you did something, you have to make amends, you do what you have to do and let it go and get on with things, because it will hold you back and it will limit you and diminish you. Not a good idea.
How do you overcome self-doubt?
There is something called self-honor. And you need to really get in touch with who you are. Self-doubt usually comes from trauma, external circumstances, people diminishing you. Your educators are big culprits in this. Your conditioning through parents, religion, and education. These will very often put you into feelings of inferiority, which is the sort of the other side of ego. So self-doubt and self-confidence and self-honor are all things to think about. And there are a lot of psychological issues that come up as you do that. But it's very, very worthwhile to write, actually. Okay, you doubt that you're a good person. Who says you're not a good person? You know, on what basis do you have this self-doubt? Are you listening to the wrong people? Are you not listening to yourself? Are you not in contact with yourself? So these are very, very deep things. And I think this is why the study, the spiritual community, the practice, all of this can help you across those things. And it's quite good to see what the origins of them are. And then you can be free.
I'll read it as it's written. How to leapfrog the ego in that being your best friend, because most of the time we create a better ego, but we are not working on the level of soul awakening.
Basically, the ego is feeling or not really being in contact with yourself. You think you're better than or worse than, and you flip-flop between the two, and you never really make contact with yourself. And so this is why it's called false ego. You take it to be real. So self-doubt is part of that, or thinking you're the greatest thing since sliced bread is part of that. Ego is something that you make. It's like a mask which you make to cover your wounds. So the more wounded you are, the more ego you will have. And that ego is a facade to protect you. It can become a carapace to protect you from other people getting too close and hurting you. So it's a very complex thing. And you can't leapfrog it. Not a good idea at all. You need to get in contact with it and get a sense of it and try to differentiate between the real you and the artificial you. And understanding what has happened to you and what it's done to you is helpful in that. And that's inner work. All that is inner work.
After being diagnosed with depression, I can't affirm positive about myself. I call myself ugly names. It's hectic. Help me to relink with the old self.
But the thing is, mental health is a big issue. And the words that are used and the healthcare industry uses changes the vocabulary for the same thing every 30 years or so. There's depression, there's schizophrenia. It used to be that, and then it becomes bipolar, and then it becomes something else and something else, and all of it is to do with negative thinking. And it is possible to control your negative thinking if you have enough inner power, but if you don't, it's very difficult. So I think a person looking at mental health needs to have a good mental health care from the health professional. You need to use positive thinking. You need to understand what is troubling you. This is not something that you can get an answer to in a question-answer session in a meditation class. But, if somebody has diagnosed you with depression, they may be a psychiatrist, they may prescribe certain antidepressants, certain psychotropic drugs, certain kinds of therapy. All of these things are very helpful, but just looking at it as just a question coming through from another person, I can't really give you an adequate answer, because it could be anything from something slight to something really big. And with a question like that, there's no way that I can know without actually talking to you personally. But I would say that, if you're taking medical help, then you need to take good advantage of it.
How does God shape our consciousness? To what extent is God playing a role in our consciousness?
Well, God is a great teacher. And God will tell you, look, you are a pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful being of light. And you have been through a long time and got depleted, and now you need to strengthen yourself. And God will tell you all sorts of very interesting things about the nature of consciousness. And then, depending on you think about it, you work with it, you experiment with it, and you develop yourself as a good student. But God is not going to do anything, to you or for you. He's not going to do your work for you. You have to do your work. God will give you the necessary information, and then you have to work with that. God did not create you. Is a very important piece of information that most people don't know. They think, okay, God created everybody, and therefore God is responsible for the mess I'm in. This is faulty logic. Every soul is eternal, and every soul is individual, and every soul has their pure side and their impure side, the bright and the dark, and you have to come to terms with it. Every soul, no exceptions. But God will give you the necessary information that you need, the education that you need to come to terms with all the different parts of yourself and arrive at an integrated whole and realize yourself. And that is the wonder of God. In the man-made world, you get a set of concepts, some of which are correct, some of which are incorrect, and there's no way you can know which is which. But God will let you have enough clarity that you can tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. But it's up to you to work with it, you see. God will not do your work for you.
Thank you very much, Duncan Bai, for hosting tonight's special program with Sister Denise. Sister Denise, thank you so much for this wonderful evening that you have again given us so much depth in spirituality. Certainly, we need to upgrade our spiritual practices and do our inner work. And of course, when everything seems to be not so in its proper order, there is always the supreme source of power that we all can lean on. Thank you very much, Sister Denise. And once again, we wish to invite you in another session, which will be upcoming. Thank you very much, Sister.